All right, let me share my screen and we will get going. All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining. So kind of same plan for today as it has been for really the last 3 meetings. After a quick review of last month's discussion, we will have some opening comments from a few guests as well as our members to help us frame our discussion today on the planning and administration focus areas. We, of course, then will devote the majority of our time together to those small group discussions before wrapping up with a discussion on next steps. So nothing crazy in terms of agenda for today. As you heard, I did note we do have a few guests. We also actually a fair number of new faces with us today. So I just want to take a quick moment and introduce all of them. So we are joined today by Matt Merrill, Chief of Staff to the Chancellor, as well as the Chief Strategy Officer for the university. Jessica Arp, Director of Communications at the Wisconsin Foundation Alumni Association, and Todd Pritchard, Director of Media and Public Relations at WFAA, both of which are joining us because unfortunately Sarah could not join us today. Nick Novak, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research Services, is joining in Steve's place. And finally, Jason King, Senior Associate Athletic Director for Capital Projects and Operations, is joining us as Chris is out traveling, I think with the men's basketball team, lucky him. So thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. So like usual, checking in on our timeline. So we are at our last meeting in the opportunity evaluation discussion. So today we're going to focus on the category of planning and administration. Like our last 3 meetings, our goal today is to discuss these focus areas, flesh them out a bit more with challenges we might face, resources we could leverage, all setting up for our usual, hopefully fast homework, where we ask you to identify kind of which of the focus areas you think would be prioritized. Quick preview on that ask. You'll see on our timeline here that we have our next round of listening sessions scheduled to begin next Thursday. And we're hoping to use the results of these surveys to help inform some of the structure of those listening sessions. So we're going to ask that everyone try to please complete their survey by Tuesday. So a very fast turnaround on that ask. Now, last time we were together, we reviewed and discussed the operations focus areas. And you'll see here on the screen, here are the initial results from that follow-up survey. Again, a low average indicates a higher priority. So like you'll see here, like always, we're not really going to delve into the details on these responses right now. Our goal is to bring these responses back as well as the results of our other surveys to our next 2 meetings. But I would just want to take at least a second to thank everyone for completing the survey and note again in our follow-up materials from today's meeting, we'll provide a little bit more detail on the distribution of the survey responses. Lastly, I really just want to point out the results of the pulse survey that we sent to the registrants of the listening sessions. Again, the goal is to give them an update on our progress at the council and to ask them to identify what are the operations focus areas that we discussed they thought should be priorities. Again, respondents can choose 0, 1, or all 8. We had 6 respondents, which actually was our highest response rate thus far. And they identified green energy and electricity and sustainable buildings as kind of the most commonly identified. Although somewhat similar to the way we ranked the operations focus areas, the top 3 or 4 are generally pretty close. That's all I had for intro. So now we're going to get into some talks from some of our guests to help set up our discussions in the latter half of our meeting today. So first I'm going to invite Matt to speak, and then we'll have Jessica go and then Cheryl. So I will stop sharing my screen and then hand it over to Matt.
All right. Thanks everyone for both being here and serving on this committee, which is a really important part of our overall sustainability efforts, and the dialogue that'll come today around identifying recommendations for campus to consider. So I was asked in prep for this just to comment a little bit about how decision-making and planning occurs at the university. And I guess I want to take it the opportunity to talk about that in two separate buckets. I think there's the formal planning and administration efforts at the university. Then there's also, and equally as importantly, the informal process by which change is made in the university, which is maybe not quite as openly transparent. And so I want to take within, really 3 minutes here, just a little bit of time to cover both of those. So on the formal side, this is actually a welcome invitation because it takes me back to maybe like 13 months ago, so pre-COVID. One of the things we were working on really diligently in the lead up to March of 2020 was the finalization of the campus's updated strategic framework, which runs 2020 to 2025. I'm just going to drop into the chat here a link to that. I assume many of you have seen it, but if you haven't, it's worth an overview. Let me talk a little bit about how we approached this. So look, every university has a strategic plan, a strategic framework. And when I entered the task of kind of updating ours, it was really fascinating to go university by university and look at how each approaches this different task. There are certainly lots of universities that put together really extensive committee processes, and the end outcome is like a 250-page report of everything the university can think it wants to do in the next 5 years. The chancellor and I talked about that way of tackling this and decided that that's probably not the best approach for us. The chancellor's very much focused on results and kind of data-driven outcomes related to things. And the feeling was, if we can't distill our priorities into something more succinct, more digestible, it's going to be harder for people to wrap their heads around it. And so we went on a more limited approach, but something which I think helps crystallize our focus in a better way. And if you look, there are 5 pillars within the strategic framework. 3 of those are pillars that will never change. As long as this university exists, they will never change. We will always have as our mission a core 3-part drive to do education, research, and service to the community. And you can look at the 250 pages across, thousands of other universities. They will all have basically that exact same thing in there. And what's under that is really important, right? Because I do think it highlights our priorities in the evolving nature of our focus. So this plan will talk a little more about alternate ways of delivering educational services. It'll talk about modernizing our research infrastructure and being prepared to take on more multi-funder grants that are large, and preparing us to do that, because that's where the research community, that's where research funding is going. And on the service side, it'll talk about different ways that we're able to reach people with our educational services that may not have been possible 5 years ago. So the subpoints within those 3 pillars, I think, are very important, but the overall pillars there are not going to change. The other 2 pillars, which are coined the high-performing organization and a vibrant campus culture, I think are in fact the 2 more interesting ones, because they're in fact the how of how we get to our core mission of teaching, research, and service. And within high-performing organization, which has kind of these 4 sub-pillars, we talk about 4 things that I think are extraordinarily important and interconnected. So 1, we talk about achieving greater performance within our financial benchmarks, resource stewardship. Obviously, much of what we want to achieve, whether it's on the educational or the research side, whether it's in the sustainability side, is resource dependent. And so putting that front and center has been a focus of the chancellor. It says, hey, look, resource development and generation is not a dirty word. It's an important component of what we do, because it enables our goals. And likewise, the other 3 in there are continuing to grow and strengthen our workforce, continuing to build strong partnerships with key agencies across the state, and then practicing sustainability in all that we do. So nesting sustainability within that framework, I think, can be interpreted by campuses. We're putting it amongst the key ways that we build a really strong organization and the how we deliver our education, research, and teaching missions. I know you guys have talked more about research and education from a sustainability front, but it is worth noting, I think our contribution to the sustainability efforts globally, nationwide, certainly is probably more driven by that than by when you look at the thousands of young, bright minds that we help to curate and the research that we provide to the world. Our biggest contribution is in those buckets. Nesting sustainability within the fabric of our overall organization is one way in which we amplify those results. I've already gone over 3 minutes, so let me just quickly touch on informal ways of making change. And so I would just say there's a lot that we can do to have the perfect plan, the perfect structure. We live in a super decentralized environment. Everyone's aware of that. Probably as decentralized as almost any organization in the country. And so top-down edicts, top-down planning efforts only go so far in this environment. The COVID experience has probably shown the limit to which we can really centrally plan stuff and that it can be effective. But in normal administration of the university, there's an art in both setting a vision and then harnessing the power of a decentralized management structure. And there's frustrations that can come with that, but there's also beauty that can come with that. And the opportunity to gather intellect and feedback and direction and autonomy from a lot of bright people. I mean, we're in the people business, and so we employ bright people. And just forcing them to follow top-down edicts is not the best way to get the most out of your organization. It's also about empowering that towards a common purpose. And so I would just say that as I've observed the chancellor and been able to work with her over 7.5 years, or her time here is 7.5 years, I've been here 5.5. The way that she drives change informally is by consistency in the questions that are asked, right? When she first came in and started talking about resource generation, people thought that was, as I said, kind of a dirty word, right? But by continually asking about it and nesting it within an intentional plan to advance our mission, that's become a commonplace understood priority. And likewise, I've seen her in administration, budget meetings, planning meetings, ask regularly about sustainability issues, impacts on the environment, and having that be continually raised as part of a conversation, I think helps to put it more front and center in the minds of all decision makers across campus, which may ultimately have a higher impact than, in fact, kind of nesting it within an overall written strategic plan. So let me stop there. I'll be happy to take any questions. I want to be respectful of the rest of the agenda and everyone else's comments that'll follow mine.
Thanks, Matt. I think you had to drop here shortly. So if anyone did have a question or comment, we could do that. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to Jessica. Well, Matt, thank you so much for those words. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you all. I hope you enjoy the weekend.
Thanks. Jessica.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for having me. I will do my level best to try to fill Sarah's shoes here today, but I don't know if that's really possible. So obviously a lot of you know broad strokes about us, but what I was hoping to share with you here is a little bit more about our role for those who don't have a deeper understanding of what the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association does and how it handles investment. So there's a few key points, as I looked at it, and I've only been with our organization a little bit more than a year now. As I've learned more about it, things that I've come to know about structure really underlines how we're able to make decisions about investments. So some of that's really helpful background to have. So obviously we're a independent nonprofit organization. Our mission is to support UW-Madison by building pride and affinity in our alumni, in the public, and is also secure resources for all of the operations that happen on campus. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our Always Forward campaign that we've been undertaking since 2013 has raised more than $3.6 billion for campus priorities, top to bottom. So we're very proud of that, and we're we actually extended our campaign through this year to build more resources during this sort of critical time. Our beliefs as well are the leadership of our organization very strongly shares the concerns that are out there about the need for sustainability, about climate change, about global warming. And our leadership believes really that fossil fuels and consumption is at the root of that issue. And we are taking steps as an organization to address that. I'll throw just into the chat here. We have a spot on our website that shows the steps that our organization is taking towards sustainability in our own operations as well. When you look then at our investments, so obviously our investment professionals manage the endowment, which makes up about 6,300 different funds that have all been given by donors. Those investments are managed by a team of professionals that until the funds are called upon by the unit or needed by the unit. But more importantly, those investment professionals and the policies of our organization are really designated and decided upon by the investment committee of our board of directors. We are governed by a board of directors. There is an investment committee that's part of that. All of our board of directors are alumni of the university. Went here, alumni and donors, I should say, of the university. So they have a stake in how this is used as well. So the investment committee, the overall board of directors, they set our policy statements, which designates the sort of eligible set of investments vehicles, is how the financial folks would say it. Our individual investments team does not select or buy individual stocks, as much larger endowments than ours do at other universities, but we hire outside managers to invest funds on our behalf. And in order to sort of preserve conflicts and preserve that independence, employees of UW-Madison can't serve on the WFAA board. It is alumni and donors. As for the assets that we hold, then what those managers decide on investing in, we have historically not shared portfolio specific asset information, in part because this is changing constantly, right? Some of them are longer term investments, but some of them are shorter term investments. And we also, because we choose outside managers to manage these funds, have certain legal non-disclosure requirements with some of those funds that are invested in. We can say generally that fossil fuel assets have been a diminishing percentage of our overall portfolio investments over time. That's largely because of market conditions. And our responsibility as investors, as a fiduciary, which is what we are, is to make the best decisions for the long-term value of those investments and for those endowments. In general, I can talk a little bit about sort of that responsibility and expectations as we believe they exist. Our donors expect we'll work to achieve the highest possible return without undue risk in order to grow the value of their gift to the UW and to support in the long term the area that they deeply care about. And the way the investments committee and our leadership have sort of classified how we think about this is that excluding certain assets at the demand of folks who are not the folks who are giving the money could be viewed as a violation of that fiduciary responsibility to say we need to follow the markets and we need to make sure that we are ensuring the highest return possible. Our alumni and friends, and another sort of consideration that we need to have here is that the folks who support and give to these to UW-Madison represent the widest array of folks possible: beliefs, occupations, interests, religions, identities, opinions about everything. And the one thing we know they have in common is that they care about UW-Madison. They are giving because they support priorities here. So we have to what Mike Knetter talks about frequently is that one of the biggest challenges that we face as a fundraising organization is growing polarization and opinions about what the university is doing, how money is spent, that kind of thing. And so we need to think about that as we make decisions as an organization about where money is allocated. We also do believe that UW-Madison can play a key part in solving these challenges that we face in sustainability and climate change. And we have a number of development directors and working in areas, and we say a rich menu of options for donors to give to help advance the research and work on solving those problems. That includes the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and a number of different areas across campus. And we have donors who are very committed and interested to advancing the work of those areas. And we believe that we also will increase the influence that we can have here by honoring the intent of the donors of where their money goes, and have confidence in donors of the future that we will maximize their gift. So as far as any other processes, the last thing I'll sort of share with you here is that any changes that would happen to our policies about board about investments of the endowment would need to be created and approved by our investments committee. That would include divestment from anything, from any specific asset class. That those discussions have happened over time and happen regularly, and strangely enough are happening as we speak, as the WFA board investment committee is meeting at this very moment. And they have discussed these possibilities over time. And I think that will obviously continue, as this is an ongoing conversation that we know is incredibly important to stakeholders, both within UW-Madison and outside of it. So I think that's all I have to share at the moment. Again, I'm happy to take any questions and answer them to the best of my ability. Todd and I will both be here as you discuss. Todd may be longer than I, as I have kiddos upstairs to attend to as well. And sort of to help listen too. We're here to listen and want to hear perspectives and be able to bring them back to our leadership and board of directors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Todd, for sticking through us through the small group discussions. So I think that might be a good time to bring up any questions as we delve into the investment focus areas. So with that, I might hand it off to Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure everyone can hear me. Good sound check.
Sound good.
I often have problems. So I want to share a little bit about the work that we do in the role of engaging diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also, the role of the Chief Diversity Officer supports the mission of the university as it works to create a diverse, inclusive, and excellent learning and working environment for all students, faculty, staff, alumni, and partners at the university. It is through collaboration, consultation, seeding new initiatives, and coordinating programs, services, and events that our division and the role of the CDO supports the campus in achieving its diversity goals. I want to make you aware, because this is taped and formal, I kind of got to give you some of the formal spiel here. It's important to acknowledge our institutional diversity statement. And I don't know if you own this, so I want you to own this because this is part of that campus learning that should happen as you enter the family of the UW-Madison, and that is understanding that diversity is a source of strength, creativity, and innovation for our university. We value the contributions of each person and respect the profound ways their identity, culture, background, experience, status, abilities, and opinion enrich the university community. We commit ourselves to the pursuit of excellence in teaching, research, outreach, and diversity as inextricably linked goals. The university fulfills its public mission by creating a welcoming and inclusive community for people from every background, people who as students, faculty, and staff will serve Wisconsin and the world. And if that doesn't embrace and embody the work of sustainability, I don't know. I don't actually need to say anything else from here, just to acknowledge the work that each and every one of us does to live out that value is significant and important to engaging sustainability and the efforts of this committee and our university in the future. I want to also acknowledge the broad scope that our office tries to address when we talk about and think about diversity, because that's often important. There are often many assumptions about how we're defining diversity and who we're representing when we step outside of our offices or our homes to represent UW-Madison and its commitments to education. So those dimensions of diversity are race, ethnicity, sex, gender, gender identity or expression, marital status, age, sexual orientation, country of origin, language, disability, socioeconomic status, and affiliations that are based on cultural, political, religious, or other identities. The idea here is that diversity is broad and is a broad representation of our global society and everything in every dimension that an individual represents in his or her or their humanity or identity. Sorry to do that, but I gotta be formal. Now, one of the roles of the Chief Diversity Officer of the university is to oversee the division of diversity, equity, and educational achievement across the world. Many of our colleagues or offices have a similar name, but they just use inclusion. We thought it was important to embrace educational achievement as it was a foundation of the way our division was formed, to really focus on strengthening, broadening, and promoting student diversity and ensuring that we can establish a pathway for a diverse citizenry to join UW-Madison to engage in higher education. All right, so our division, long name, Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement, we affectionately call the DDEA, is an enterprise to support and embody the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and education in principle and in practice. We strive to create a university community where everyone thrives personally and professionally in a diverse, global, and interconnected campus environment and beyond those boundaries. In our efforts, we value community, inclusion, organizational excellence, transparency, accountability, and social justice. The breadth of our commitment and our contributions to DE&I work span a lot of territory, as I have tried to express here, and include efforts to create a more diverse community through education and professional pathway programs, scholarship, recruitment initiatives, policy oversight, engagement with shared governance committees, compliance and oversight of some of the legal things, affirmative action, employee disability resources and services, our outreach and engagement and grassroots opportunities on campus and in our communities. Again, it is all through collaboration that this work is accomplished, in seeding new initiative that this work is accomplished, and coordinating all of these efforts. We see ourselves as partners across our campus to educate, to represent thought leadership and diversity and inclusion, to recognize where there may be barriers that should be reduced or blocked to ensure that we can create an accessible and inclusive environment for all. And on that note, inclusion is the spirit in which I am working to educate our community today. One of our primary goals this year has been in engaging our campus community in inclusive education to help understand the shared value of diversity and inclusion across our campus, to elevate everyone's knowledge of self and how self engages others and systems, and how that actually creates the campus climate that is in its current state and the campus climate that we want to see in the future. Therefore, it is through inclusion education efforts we think we can cover the most ground in changing our campus climate and assuring that there is diverse representation in thought, in idea, in planning, in policy, in execution, that we are effective in being the excellent institution that we are. I always worry about my time because I'm pretty long-winded, but I will only include or conclude by saying the diversity and inclusion efforts of our campus are here to be thought partners in creating an environment where all people are represented, and therefore through that representation, we are the most innovative and excellent institution that we can be. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cheryl. All right, next on our agenda is Natalie, Emma, and Michael to provide a little update from the most recent student subcommittee meeting.
All right. Hi, everyone. I apologize for not having my video on. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties right now. So I hope to join you soon, but bear with me for a second. So on behalf of the student subcommittee, Emma, Michael, and I will be sharing some of the upcoming initiative focus areas that we will be discussing today, actually, that the subcommittee really had a great conversation and really resonated with the students. So I'm going to keep mine short and sweet. So I will be discussing sustainability integration. Again, just to kind of keep it short and sweet, the student subcommittee really believes that sustainability should not only be kept at the forefront of every decision made by the university, but also every decision should evaluate the sustainability impact, as we believe that this is really important for a student and just like the student experience at UW in order to keep the student forefront at the mind and sustainability. So like I said, mine was super short. Just really believe that sustainability integration should be kept at the forefront for every decision made. And now I'm going to pass it off to Michael.
All right, hello everyone. So the part that I want to talk about is social sustainability, which was a common topic brought up by many different students in our subcommittee. And it was a shared goal that throughout any of these decision making that Natalie was talking about, that it's important to include social sustainability as a tenet of those plans and in future decision making. And then with that, I'll turn it over to Emma.
Yeah, so my priority that I was going to convey was about actually divestment. So I want to say thank you, Jessica, for providing a lot more context on that. I'm excited to be able to relay that back to the student subcommittee. So like she was saying, that process comes from the board. And so one of the like big things that really almost every student on the committee resonated with was talking about getting as much transparency as possible about kind of what that portfolio looks like, but also having like some pretty clear policies about divestment from fossil fuels. A lot of people think that while we are producing like very good minds that are putting sustainable scholars out there, we also want to kind of put our money where our mouth is and put our investments into something that students are like very passionate about, which is sustainability. So in that, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, pretty much just more clarity and then like very clear targets about what that policy looks like from the board of when things are being divested and then what they will be divested into. And that I think is it from the student subcommittee.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalie, Emma, and Michael. So I will take a few minutes here and go over the focus areas. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Just got a little feedback in my mic. Okay, good. It must just be on my end. So I'll share that. Hopefully that's coming through okay for everyone. Last thing before we break out into our small groups. Same story as before, right? The focus areas that we developed for our discussions today were based upon feedback that we received at our first round of campus listening sessions, the kind of experience from our team, feedback from council members, which again, we will build upon in today's meeting, and of course, our gap analysis from our STARS report. Quickly on that front, that's what I'm showing you right now. We sent out the detailed analysis when we sent out the focus areas, I think on Tuesday of this week, but just want to pop up the heat map here and note that in this section of the STARS report, while there's plenty of opportunities for improvement, we are kind of at or kind of just below many of our peers in these areas. So what are we going to talk about? The focus areas for our small group discussions today. I'll just run through each one of these very quickly so that we are all on the same page before our discussions. So first one here, institutional structures, is really around kind of the opportunity of what new or different organizational structures can aid or would be needed to ensure the implementation of the priorities we as a council here define. Sustainability integration is the idea that kind of regardless of any formal structures, what processes can we develop to ensure sustainability is considered in kind of leadership discussions and decision-making processes. Sustainable investments is around kind of opportunities to understand and or improve the sustainability of the types of financial investments the university holds. Green Revolving Fund is an opportunity to develop a fund specifically to invest in university operational sustainability improvements. The systems-based decision-making focus area we developed around the kind of opportunity to think about university-wide systems for evaluation and or decision-making that could help align sustainability-related policies or planning really up and down kind of hierarchies across campus. Social sustainability, this focus area is really meant to address the overlap of social justice and sustainability, and really the need to ensure that you're advancing equity, inclusion, and justice as a part of any initiative that plans to advance sustainability. On this one, I want to call out, I think, something that Michael touched on, as well as something that we heard a lot as we were sharing the initial draft of these focus areas with SAC members and campus subject matter experts, that the action items you see associated with this focus area really could fit actually in a lot of other different focus areas we discussed in previous meetings or today. And so one item for when you're in your small group discussions on this is to think about whether this social sustainability is really its own focus area or is better served as a theme that we bring out across all of the final priorities that we pull together. So I just want to plant that seed for the discussion. And then finally, the last one here was employee engagement. So this is around what opportunities we could have to use sustainability as a means to improve employee engagement, perhaps increase passion for the work that we all do here and the impact that we have as a university. So that's it for setup. Any clarifying questions on these before I hand it over to Deb to get us ready for our discussions? All right, Deb, take it away.
All right, so now we're going to break into our small groups as we've done. For those of you who have been here before, you know the routine. For those of you who have not been with us before, we'll just do a quick go over. We'll have 2 rounds of discussion, and in each of those, we'll be reflecting on the questions that you see up here on the screen. And we'll be taking notes on those in each of the meetings. We'll be recording each of those, just as we are doing here. And then we'll come back and be ready to wrap up the meeting. So 2 quick rounds to answer these questions about challenges, resources, and what might be missing. And then we'll do that twice. And so we'll flip so that all the focus areas are covered. Alex, time for Zoom magic.
All right, give me 1 second here and I'll zip you all off and I'll see you on the other side.
Hello, crew.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good to have you all here.
See the group. Okay.
Change you to a gallery mode. Now I can see everybody. Oh, yes. Missy, are you recording? Are you going to do the recording? Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome back. It's kind of hard to believe that we are in our final subject area, focus area discussion before we hit kind of the multi-meeting slide towards our decision point and making recommendations. So congratulations, you've made it this far, and thank you all again. So in my breakout group, what we're going to be doing is talking about the final 3 focus areas. And so as per usual, I will share my screen. It should be this one. Can you see the focus areas? All right, are they big enough? Should I zoom a little bit? Is that a yes or no? Not sure. Maybe a little. Let's go to like 125 might get a little big. Let's try like 110. How's that? Maybe. Problem is I'm gonna have to scroll a little bit, but that's all right. We can do that.
There's a little feature I found out, like for me, I have low vision, so I have to do a lot of adaptive things. When you look at view options at the top of your, it appears when you're taking control. For me, it works to do the zoom ratio so that way I can personalize my view. So it doesn't necessarily limit what you're able to do. So that's one strategy.
Interesting. So as in the view options in Zoom itself?
When you're in, so right now you have control of the screen, but when I move my cursor towards the top next to that green, symbol there, view options appears. And at that stage, when I hit zoom ratio, it customizes what I see. So I'm no longer dependent upon your view, because sometimes the text is still too small for me, and I can go in and I can make my screen larger, and it doesn't affect your navigation. So it's just an adaptive technique there.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess prior to just turning this over and getting into the focus conversation, I would just say, I think what's something I'm noticing and coming out of our initial speakers and what Alex was also saying about the social sustainability focus area, which we'll get a chance to talk about in this meeting, is I think there's an interesting tension in our conversation today between the kind of top-down versus integrated bottom-up systems approach to these focus areas and also to the initiatives and action items that fit within them. So I think that could be part of our conversation in general. Our first focus area indeed is system-based decision making, and it walks the line between requiring certain kinds of measures and adding tags and so on to these campus systems, and incentivizing things that will hopefully allow for more of a bubble up effect of sustainability. So, but just to go to our basic approach here, I'd like to turn it all to you and ask the basic question of what is standing out to you amongst these three focus areas. Which ones are you feeling the most excited about?
Can I just get a clarification with you guys?
Yes, please.
So on this topic of social sustainability, so when I read that definition, I find that sustainability is kind of the topic it's kind of like the leveling ground for everyone. So I don't want to sound out of place, but I guess like advancing social justice and equity, I feel like sustainability is something anyone can get behind, no matter who you are. Is that, I feel very uncomfortable trying to get clarification on that. I'm sorry.
Jacob, I hear what you're saying, Jacob. This is Nola. Can I just share a little bit of what I kind of took for that? So I do agree with you that that's one thought, but I think a large part is there's different usage of the terminology of sustainability and different values, and you wonder how can it be so different, but it is. And when I can't remember her name there, she spoke from alumni from the foundation's work. I heard her very clearly when she talked about the diversity of who they support and return on investments, and I think of that as an example of the challenges they have to deal with, right? And what are sustainable solutions? There isn't a given approach that when people want to return on investments, for example. So that really kind of spoke to me in appreciating sometimes the difference in interpretations, right? And the values of sustainability. So,
thank you. I completely get it reminds me of when I believe a politician spoke with us early on, and he mentioned something how it's just not a topic brought up in inner city. So thanks for resetting my mindset on that.
That was Mandela Barnes, Lieutenant Governor.
No, I think Jacob, to your question about social sustainability, to be perfectly honest, it's a broad phrase that potentially encompasses a lot of things. And for that reason, it can feel a little bit vague and a little bit hard to kind of pin down. And so I'd say even within the Office of Sustainability, where we really consider this a central value, it can be hard to define precisely what that value is, what it looks like, how it manifests, how it plays out in the campus community, in the broader community. And so I think that's why it's important for us to be able to talk about this and to consider that question that Alex brought up of is social sustainability a thing that you do, or is it more of a broader set of values that you integrate and across all of our campus and all of our sustainability efforts? And it's probably a little bit of both, because the one other piece, and then I'll get out of the way here, that I would say kind of in response to your question is, I think what social sustainability tries to get at are these intricate overlaps. So you talk about things like environmental justice or something like that. So you have a situation where, communities of color are more likely to be near polluting industries, where redlining or other forms of segregation has imposed that on them for many, centuries. And so that's a situation where prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and even those words are kind of, big umbrella words, right? But prioritizing the values that are within that, within the context of sustainability, allows you to get at some of these very real problems that people experience on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of what we're after here, but it is tricky. It's tricky to define. Okay, that was way too much from the facilitator. I'd love to hear more from the actual members on this.
Yeah, this is just Nola again. I just wanted to just, agree with all that, I think that was one of the challenges when we look at this as a council, coming to a shared understanding of sustainability. There isn't one, it's really a buffet of things. And I think it's really important for us to contextualize our perspective when we're talking about that, because it is intersectional, just like the example you provided of environmental justice. It cuts across in so many different ways, and people live it in different ways. People can say, yes, I believe in sustainability, but you look at their purchase choices, right, their fashion choices, it doesn't share an alignment. There's different aspects that people commit to or even have an understanding to. And when you talk about business entities, it's a whole different understanding and perspective or commitment. And we have to understand that it isn't one thing. And that's the great challenge. And some people, it's an offense. And you wonder how it becomes to their vantage point, right? Their values and the context in which they've been introduced, exposed to it, and even processed what the term means or the concept.
Yeah, that's well put, Nola. Thank you.
Yeah. So you're wanting us to show which focus area really speaks to us with regards to our focus topic today, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got these three, and you're going to have a chance to look at the other ones in the next breakout.
Yeah.
So we're trying to kind of pull out what's important to you and whether any of these are really the ones that stand out as things that we are potentially going to kind of move up in the priority list. Because as a reminder, we're ultimately what we're prioritizing is the far left side here, the actual focus area, and everything that falls under that is going to be worked out in the course of actually trying to implement things.
Yeah, well, I'll just throw this out here. For me, institutional structures for sustainability, and then I look at the sustainability integration, right? It's just below it too, right? I get a little cautious because we tend to have this pattern when we talk about, leadership. We start recreating what I think is kind of wrong in our systems. We start recreating this empire again, and, things are so strongly defined. And very often change comes from, like I said, the social movement, right? At that level, because then it's integrated into the system, into the body, as opposed to dictated and, that structure. So I struggle with that, because you do need to have support. Of course, you do need to have the commitment and understanding and values within leadership positions, and we do need to have that, of course, and we have that. But the question is, how do we experience it throughout our institution, the way that we do things? So it says UW lacks an upper leadership position focused on sustainability. And we need to start. So I see your office as that structure. So I kind of, I'm a little fuzzy on how that issue is stated, because at the time in which we did the audit, we did have an office in place, right? Is there more change that's needed? What's different about what you currently have versus what we're reaching for?
Sure. So I will say, and this is this is good to all talk about these particular focus areas at the top are, you're going to have a chance to really get into them in the next breakout. But I think that's a good question. And, I think a simple answer is to say that the Office of Sustainability, we do have a leadership position now, thanks to Missy, and we've had a co-director model in the past. However, we are bi-divisional at this point. Our reporting lines work up through the Nelson Institute and Facilities Planning and Management.
Okay.
And that's always been the case. And there are real advantages to that, but there are also some real disadvantages when it comes to institutional planning.
Okay, I didn't know that. I
No,
thought
that's okay.
because we have the vice provost on there for finance, I thought that because I've seen the chancellor articulate support for it. I didn't know that you were structurally located there. For some reason, I had a belief you were. So that really helps quite a bit. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure, of course. We try not to make that too obvious in the way that we comport ourselves, because we're trying to be the Office of Sustainability, but nevertheless, that it does impose certain restrictions on our ability to do things on campus.
Certainly, that makes total sense now. Okay, yeah. Leadership. And with regard to the sustainability integration, so for me, it lends to a question. So what you shared with me is important, and you're right. You all do an excellent job of not saying, "Hey, we don't have this. We're not here," because I say you all have such a respectable and gracious way of partnering with others, right? It doesn't seem competitive. It doesn't seem to, it seems like it's a good thing. There's aligned values in those who partner with you, and it's spoken so highly and well on your behalf, your office's behalf. And when I look at sustainability integration, and it says the UW the consistent inclusion of sustainability and upper leadership communications, I feel like can we have some real talk here? Because I'm not aware of what challenges exist, right? The advisory council is a great way, and the representation you have here to facilitate communications, but what are your needs that list this as an issue to address? So I don't know where you're lacking, right?
Sure.
I'm going to jump in.
Please do.
What I'm thinking about, whether it's relevant, I'm still working on that. I see the challenge in engaging sustainability as a priority, similar to engaging diversity, equity, and education. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's often, it's almost like if everybody's responsible, sometimes no one's responsible. And there's not a clear value statement presented to our campus constituents. And right now, I guess I'm situated on this thing like at membership, like when you come to say, I want to become a member of this particular community, I understand what their values are and they align with mine. And we probably lack, we lack or are still trying to demonstrate what those values are and how we articulate that to individuals who want to sort of become members or connected or bridged or affiliated with our organization. And so to me, our shared values in sustainability or diversity, or those things are sometimes gray and not necessarily clearly articulated. And we assume it's because of structure, like there's nobody in charge at the top who makes sure that this value is then integrated into everything that we do, from hiring, orienting, communication, strategic planning, policy setting, the way we build our boards or communities or committees or whatever. Like it's unclear how that's done. And we pride ourselves in the way our organization is structured. We're so dynamic and huge and large that we can't create one size fits all anything, anywhere. And sometimes that's where we lose the opportunity to articulate this clear priority or value in our work or in who we are or in who becomes a part of who we are. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that was very useful, and it makes me think that part of what we're talking about here is, what does this word engagement mean? I certainly find that to be, it's a word that I use as a communicator, and also a word that I don't always know exactly what I mean when I use it. What is engagement? Is it an event? Is it communicating with people? Is it enabling them to feel a sense of ownership and meaning and value? So, it's there's a employee engagement component at the bottom here, and I would also argue that systems-based decision making, especially once you kind of dig into the action items, there are other forms of engagement that are happening there too. When you talk about, adding sustainability tags to campus systems, is that a form of engaging employees and thinking about sustainability as they're doing things in their day-to-day lives, creating policies, doing HR work, whatever? When you incorporate sustainability into, impact analysis and decision making around big decisions happening on campus, is that also a form of engagement? And you're engaging up in that sense if you're thinking about, usually we talk about engagement as, the people in charge engaging everyone else, and maybe this is a way of kind of engaging in multiple directions. But anyway, I'm just responding to what I think is a nuanced point that you just made, and I'm glad this is part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I was mulling over a similar thought actually about employee engagement and systems-based decision making, of like, often we look at them separately, and employee engagement from this list is very like outside of work, like recognition and wellness and all that kind of stuff. But I think an important part of like the actual engagement of people in their jobs and in the processes is something that is very, I guess, important to me. So thank you for, I was mulling it over, but I was not actually finding the words of what I wanted to say, so thank you.
Yeah. This leads me back to, as I mentioned to Alex and Missy and Nathan, I'm designing an e-course in sustainability, a foundational course, and I'm working on the objectives. And as I've been reading more about it, one of the objective goals is to articulate an understanding of sustainability in context, right? And to come to understand how the context influences one's values and how they respond to the naming of it and how they even adapt to it. That the context in which you're introduced to it can affect your values and your agreement, or even if it's from a compliance perspective. I mean, when we did the audit, so many people were introduced to this. What do you mean by sustainability? And responded in a different way. Even the instrument is designed from a particular vantage point. And so there's the challenge there, speaking into shared values. What are they? What do we agree upon? In the strategic framework or plan for the university, it's very broad, and sustainability could be infused within every part of that. And you're right, that's where it speaks to the leadership and the influence on communications that is filtered throughout. I work with UW Libraries, and we just did our strategic framework, and we have diversity as assumed and included without. It's not listed as one of the goals, but it's one of our stated assumed values, is what it says up at the beginning. And I believe they've added accessibility, which is of course very important. And I've shared with them that sustainability should be a part of that too. Because now they're seeing how, say for example, there's additional priorities you can get when you look at facilities, facility issues. If you want to have a project done by facilities and planning, there's credit that you get when you infuse sustainability as a part of those proposals. So it's speaking to the listening, right? And so there's a chance for me to try to influence the articulation of sustainability in the different things that we do, right? So that's one way we can influence. We're one of the larger departments on campus as far as staffing bodies, but we don't have that monetary influence. And each school, each college would probably respond to that slightly differently. And it's really hard. We're like trying to straddle an octopus with even additional arms, right? Where do you begin and how do you influence that? So Yeah, yeah. So I think we're all in agreement.
I think those are great points, and the accessibility one is well taken, as is the vision of the cat. We're pro animals on this call. I'm aware that Alex is gonna switch us out in about 2 or 3 minutes. So I just wanted to ask if I'd like to come back to this idea of should we? I'm curious what everyone thinks about this idea of having social sustainability be its own focus area, or whether we should be integrating the items that fall in that throughout all the focus areas.
All of the above. I think
Both and that's interesting. Yeah.
That's what we talked about with the students of like they were concerned about like when we do like the huge prioritization at the end of all of the different focus areas of social sustainability like being on the list but not very high up, and so then it wouldn't be like tackled in the way that we kind of wanted it to. So I do think it is important to highlight it as its own category, but I think like we were saying, there's a lot of different pieces that easily fall into other categories, and so just putting it in as many spots as we can.
Exactly.
Beneficial, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
I do too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Well, it looks like Alex just messaged he's going to swap facilitators now. So enjoy your next conversation.
Oh,
thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yep.
We hope this was helpful. We just had questions, more questions.
No, this is good. This is really good. Hello. Gang's all here. All right, looks like everybody's here. No one's popping in. Took a second to switch us on off the last one, so make sure there's no delays. Well, nice to see you all again, and I hope you had a good conversation after about the first set of focus areas. We're going to be talking about the final 3. Let's see, Missy, where you're taking notes in your own document, or no, you've got them here. The first question that we usually want to get to in this part of the breakout is, what do you think about the previous conversation? And instead of showing you the notes document and having you try to read it, as nice of a job as Missy's doing, I'll give you just a quick kind of overview and invite any initial thoughts. We spent a fair amount of time talking about the social sustainability focus area, and what is social sustainability? Why is it there? And this idea that Alex kind of queued up for us of whether or not the items in social sustainability should be distributed throughout all the focus areas, or whether there should be its own focus area that we're kind of prioritizing amongst the others. And in the end, the answer for the last group was both and. It was both. The items should be distributed because it should fall everywhere. It should be kind of top down and bottom up, and it should also be called out as its own value that we need to pursue. So I'd say that was one of the biggest takeaways that came out of it. And we also talked a little bit about clarifying why it is that there's even a thing called social sustainability, as opposed to thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth as being values that we should all share independent of whether we're interested in sustainability. And the point I made there was that's true, and sustainability is trying to highlight some of the overlaps between problems of injustice and lack of diversity and the environment. So, classic example being communities of color are more likely to be located in places that are near dumps, toxic fumes, and so forth. And there's a long and difficult history that has led to that. And so it's not just about diversity per se. It's also about noticing where those overlaps are happening with other more environmental issues. Okay, that's my overview. Missy, do you think I missed anything key there? Okay. Well then, I will share my screen. Everyone see? All righty. So I'm going to turn it over to you all with this, the general first question. I mean, first of all, if there's any feedback that you have on what the previous group said, or if you want to incorporate that at all, I welcome it. But in general, it's what stood out to you about these final 3 focus areas. What got you excited? What are you thinking about? What would you like to discuss as we begin here before we move on to things like barriers and so on? And the items again are systems-based decision making, social sustainability, and employee engagement.
So on the first item, sort of this interesting idea of this triple bottom line and internal carbon pricing and financial analysis. I think it's a very interesting, I would say controversial idea. If we can try to figure out how we could do that internally, it'll be quite interesting. For instance, if certain programs are heavily unsustainable, they get taxed, and you get some sort of revenue points or something, and that gets used to subsidize other programs are carbon negative or sustainability negative. And I think it extends even in the social part. I mean, I think in some ways, let's say in the equity and tuitions and stuff like that, it's trying to have additional tuition for people who can afford it and use that to subsidize people who can't afford tuition. It's sort of like that. And sort of this unsustainable practices that bring more money in are subsidizing sustainable practices that in the long term they'll pay off, but they need help in the short term. I don't know. I mean, and Nick was talking quite a bit in our last meeting about how in the research sponsored program, they're thinking about new ways of doing things like that. Can this type of idea come into that structural transformation? Quite interesting to think of.
Yeah, this one is a little bit new to me, but when I think about the grant world, I mean, when we look at grant applications that Geary sends down to us, I mean, we review them. I mean, I don't work at RSP anymore, but I did. And we review those grants for a lot of different criteria that are based on university policy. Sustainability is not part of that right now. But maybe in some way it could be. I'm not certain of that. Mm-hmm. But I do like the word on the last bullet point in the last column, the incentivization. I like the incentivization of collaboration, because that's something that we do struggle to do on campus when it comes to research. People want to do it but we've talked about this idea of decentralization, which makes it very hard to do that. It makes it hard to coordinate that. But if there was some incentivization for that and for sustainability in our grants, I think that would be beneficial to the UW.
I would take it even a little bit further, related to what I said in the last meeting, where, if you want to create an expectation across the entire institution, you have to have leadership that is bought in and delivering that expectation across all areas of this campus, whether it be the provost, BCFA, student affairs, ASM. And so, if we want to put sustainability in an expectation for an individual unit, that has to come from a leadership position at the top, whether it's a vice chancellor and Missy's on this, so she knows that I respect the heck out of her and have a great relationship with her. But Missy answers to a person. There's some layers here, right? And if we want buy-in across the entire institution and have a system-based expectation for sustainability practices, it's got to come from alignment at the top, that everybody's in agreement that this is what we're going to tell our deans, directors, and supervisors that we're going to weave into this thing to make the biggest impact.
I think kind of building off of that, like talking about sustainability, we're talking about in decision making, we're thinking about the impacts of everything. sustainability requires us to think about how our waste and how every part of what we're doing, what we utilize, is where it's going and how it's being managed and how it's being dealt with. And I think talking about social sustainability, when you transition that idea of thinking about every single thing and where it's going, thinking about where this waste is going, who's managing it, what communities are managing it, what positive and negative impacts are coming and happening to that community because of their role in that waste management or that specific action happening to them. And so to me, applying this idea of sustainability socially to making sure that all communities are being sustained and all communities are being helped, and we're thinking about the impacts of our decisions and our decision making on all the communities that will be affected.
These are great. Go ahead, Jerry. Yep. Or at least I saw you on mute, so I was assuming you were going to say something.
No, I was just thinking about how when the Office of Sustainability was started, sort of the previous generation, in the early years, there was sort of grant opportunities available for setting up small research grants, cooperating between different units, like what Nick was talking about, as well as education grants that were available to get education programming in sustainability area. And eventually we got it got into a sunset after the first couple of years of cycle. And I think it'll be good to sort of reinvigorate some program like that that can come top down as well, to give monetary incentives for developing sustainability programs. And I think it can go across the board, addressing social sustainability, addressing energy sustainability, and even programs that are looking into employee engagements, things like that. I think having monetary incentives, time incentive, I think time is perhaps the most difficult resource that we all have to deal with, teaching release or whatever form it comes from, to add to, we talked about staffing levels as well, to release, give ourselves time to think about these things and come up with programming to advance these ideas would be really nice.
I would just like to add too, in a previous discussion, we talked about obviously like integrating sustainability in everything. And this is also jumping off to what Nathan, you said the previous group talked about, is that in order to move forward with sustainability, social sustainability needs to be prioritized, right? Like it's almost a different kind of way of thinking with social sustainability. So when we act on different decisions, we have to make sure that we're prioritizing that these are creating equitable, inclusive environments for everyone, students, staff, community members, that we're going through this and making sure that's at the forefront as we go through this decision-making process, as this body moves forward, that social sustainability should be integrated into all of our recommendations, but then also have its own set of, this is what we need to prioritize.
Go ahead, Missy.
I just want to comment that right now, environmental impacts are the core driver for sustainability. So that shift in mental models to making social justice, social impacts, the priority is, it's very enlightening. Thank you, Natalie. I'd love to see this. Thank you.
Well, it also goes to this, and I think we only have a couple minutes left before Alex is going to steal us away, but it goes to this idea of the triple bottom line, which is sort of roughly people, planet, prosperity, right? So clearly there are decisions to be made or to be integrated into the idea of sustainability that pertain to things like equity and justice, and that also pertain to things like efficiency and cost savings, and long-term financial planning, very important for institutions, and that also pertain to things like water quality and air quality and biodiversity and so on. I mean, it really needs to be all of them. That's why sustainability, which itself is kind of a vague word, it's about sustaining the planet I would echo Missy in saying that bringing in that that equity and diversity piece to it, if you can call it a piece, is so crucial, or else you miss a huge portion of that sustainable. It is not sustainable to do it in a way that is inequitable, that is unjust.
I think real quick, kind of jumping off the points that you were making, is I think another tenet of that is, while we're thinking about it, we should not be comparing efficiency and costs and advantages to human life and happiness and prosperity. That we cannot value any certain amount of efficiency over a human's life or a human's happiness. And I think that's another point of the social sustainability, is focusing, or is the tenet that a human life is irreplaceable and irvaluable. You can't put a value to it. And so it can't be it can't be value, or efficiency and cost can't be valued more than any human life.
That's an important reframe. Thank you. Well, I see we have 20 seconds left for these breakouts are going to close. So thank you all. This was already really useful. And I think we'll have time to kind of do a quick come back together here before we close out.
All right, everyone. Pop up the focus areas for y'all. Just you need a reference. I think we're recording. We just said yes to that. So let's just jump right in. Uh-oh, I have one problem here. I need to get to the document again. There it is. All right, so as we've done before, we're just going to think about what are challenges that we could face when advancing these focus areas, and what resources might we be able to leverage. So it's not that different than maybe we might look at a strategic plan. What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses and threats that are in our way? So that we can think about what we might do to overcome them. So we can just start with institutional structures for sustainability, challenges, or resources. And when you feel moved to talk.
So I think on the first item, I think what on the institutional structures, I sort of have a feeling. I think what the issue to address and the example initiatives are important. But what Matt also talked about, these informal processes, and it's very important at all of our units at the college level, department level, different centers, different programs, to constantly think about that. I know we also heard from Jessica on the priorities. I mean, when everything comes, there's always a bottom line. And the bottom line affects the decision making. And it's very important. You know, you got a jar of peanut butter at the store. There's one that's in a glass jar and the other one's in a plastic jar. And which one are we picking up, right? And we look at the price and say, okay, this is this much, this is that much. And our hand tends to pick the one that's lower cost. And it's sort of built into our DNA in some ways. And to work against it, we have to make an effort. And that sort of an informal process has to be part of our recycling, all these little things. And I think the structures, whatever we do, I think SAC, you know, by itself, or the student subcommittee by itself, we can keep on coming up with these initiatives, and we can publicize it as much as we can. But this informal process that Matt talked about is extremely important. From the leadership, the deans, the department chairs, and I think that's. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I sort of recognize that big challenge that goes beyond words.
Yeah, yeah. This is a big change. It's going to take something to make it happen, isn't it? Other
follow up. Hi, Deb. Oh, sorry. Somebody else was talking before me. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thanks, John. So I'd like to follow on to that, and this is my first meeting, so if I'm way off base on this, put me in my place here. I'm totally fine with that. But as you were talking, it sort of struck me that it seems like sort of the second component of the Wisconsin idea to me, from my perspective in managing research grants and managing research portfolios and that sort of thing, is Wisconsin always does more with less. And with less, I mean people, right? We are human resource wise, we're very lean compared to our peers. And I think when I think about things like sustainability, and we're talking about lacking this upper leadership position, I think, in my opinion, a way to ensure that those informal discussions happen, but also a way to ensure action happens, is by funding this by way of staff and an office. I think we have to be very careful to not say, yep, UW-Madison's going to do this, we're on board with it, and then we dump it into somebody's lap who's already overworked, because we are all at capacity. In fact, I'm trying to work out just a strategic plan for my own office that I've been sketching out over the last few days, because our office has gotten to the point of complete saturation with all, and that's all of our lives. But I think if this is to be a real thing, we have to be serious about it and allocate staff and resources to it.
Thanks, Nick. John, you wanted to go?
Yeah, so Nick hit on, I had two challenges that I'll point out. Nick kind of hit on what I was thinking. I think from a leadership standpoint, we have an Office of Sustainability, but this is a much bigger lift than the resources that are available in that office. And I mean, that's nothing to disparage Missy's effort, because I respect the heck out of the work that she does and the passion that she has in this. But I do worry about, how do you get buy-in from an incredibly decentralized, very large, at times incredibly bureaucratic and under politically pressured public university, without that leadership that always has this in front of other leaders and the executive team with the resources to deliver. And then the second challenge that I think ties into it, that I worry about and I try to express all the time, is that, universities have kind of this cyclical loss of institutional memory, particularly with students. I mean, students typically come and go, and thousands and thousands of students leave us every year. And in order to, the students' involvement is critically important in this, but in order to continue the momentum and not having to kind of take 2 steps back every 12 months and relearn, why we're doing what we're doing. So the student involvement is absolutely critical, but I think there needs to be a more formalized process, just like I spoke about with the leadership, by which the students that are continually engaged in this effort have been exposed to it for a year or two, so that we can continue that momentum with the student population as we go, versus influxing a whole brand new committee. And there's probably a balance where maybe you have a few new students that could be first year students, and some are on off years that are second, third, or graduate students. I just want to make sure that we have that institutional memory, so we don't have to hit pause for it takes everybody 3 to 6 months to get used to this place when you first arrive at it, whether you're a student or employee, right? And this is a huge lift for everybody. So I do worry about institutional memory and how you get buy-in from a leadership standpoint with an actual intentional office to do this.
Thanks, John. Anybody have any other resources so that you can think of that we might leverage to address this issue?
I was just going to say, kind of jumping off of John's point. So when I leave my position, I technically leave like a transition document that has all of my notes, all of the plans, everything moving forward. And I think honestly, that should be kind of expanded. And so that, especially with new subcommittee members, new SAC council members, and anything kind of relating to sustainability, kind of have that document or transition plan. So that way, just exactly what John said, when someone else comes into my position, they don't have to take 2 steps back to just learn everything that went on. They have that document right there. They have all the resources right there in this concise place to look forward to. And I think communication is going to really be a key asset here as we move forward.
Thanks, Natalie. Anything else about institutional structures before we move on? I want to make sure we touch on each of them. And
Yeah, can I join in?
yeah, please.
Yeah, so I want to ditto everything that people are saying about having the structure and having that integration of sustainability as a core tenet of all of our executive decision makers, and having our leaders hold that at the forefront of their minds as they're working with all their teams. One of the concerns that I thought of when Jessica was speaking about the foundation was the foundation's role as a fiduciary and keeping funding, and the focus that I drew from that was focusing on sustaining funding for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Whereas in my eyes, the role of the foundation and what it should be doing is not searching for funding, but searching to sustain the University of Wisconsin-Madison itself. We're not sustaining the funding. We're not focused on keeping where it's at. And my concern with that comes in with things like divestment, where Jessica was talking about that's something that has to be approved by the foundation, and that their job as a fiduciary is to focus on keeping this funding and on focusing on this funding and the monetary value of it. And my concern is, in the past, that has been used as reasons to discriminate against certain groups and to sorry, I'm trying to completely formalize my thoughts here, but for people to focus on the funding, saying, oh, there's no funding in this area, there's no funding for sustainability, there's no one paying for the world to be saved, so that's not where we're going to go. We're not going to go into green energy because there's not funding there. And that's not what I want this conversation to be. What I want this conversation to be is, what should the University of Wisconsin do? And the foundation's job is to find funding for that. The foundation should be looking to support the university, not looking to support our financial basis. Even if it's detrimental, I think it's still important that we save our world. So that's my concerns and my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Michael. Any other last thoughts about this area before we move on? I want to make sure we get to touch on each of them, but I don't want to lose anything either. Okay, sustainability integration.
I think that I can repeat what I don't need to keep this long, but exactly what I said in my first concern. I mean, if you Matt said it very well, top-down leadership only goes so far in such a decentralized area, but in order to have this buy-in across all of our areas of this campus, there has to be that top-down approach in order to have the top-level support, right? And expectation that this is
yes,
the entire campus.
That expectation is a really big cue to others in the university about what they need to do, right? Yeah. And so given that, what you just said, what are some of the resources that we have available to us to leverage that? What do we have to leverage to make sure that that's happening?
I don't know that this is a resource, but you know, we have, as I think about this, I think about all of the leadership areas of the campus. You know, we have a vice chancellor of diversity. We have a provost over the academic area. We have a vice chancellor of research, graduate education, vice chancellor of finance and administration. I believe that if we're going to say that this is one of our 4 huge strategic priorities that Matt had mentioned, I don't know why there would be that level of leadership for this moving forward, if that's what we're saying is our commitment. That's how I kind of see it, Deb. I don't know that answers your question.
Yeah. And yeah, how do we get that? It has to be something that comes from the leadership. Is there someone whose job it is to keep banging that drum for the rest of us so we keep thinking about it? Yeah.
And Deb, this might be a little bit of the opposite of what you're looking for, but to add on to what Michael said, you know, this idea of sort of making sure we're looking to the future and protecting our future, I feel like again, my world is sponsored research, and with every grant application we submit, there's a section on, or nearly every proposal we submit, there's a section on infrastructure, equipment, and facilities available. I think we can provide information to our funding sources and our sponsors on what UW-Madison is doing for sustainability. That will help us maybe even offset losses that we might incur by way of some of this disinvestment. Because I think the federal government and the state and some of our for-profit and not-for-profit sponsors will really be impressed if we're doing more in this area.
Yeah, and it might be a way to move them if they're not thinking that way, right?
Yeah, I think we can be a leader here.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, and again, going back to what Michael said, yes, there's a fiduciary responsibility. We want to maximize our investment, and it should be, which should come first, the money or the value? And we should be funding the value. It's kind of the way that sounds from what he said. Yeah. Anything else about sustainable investments? Or which one? Oh, integration, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm getting nervous about the time. So, as we're starting to talk about sustainable investments, is there anything else that anybody wants to say, both in terms of barriers to making this happen, to resources, whatever they might be? And I want to say one thing about resources too. Resources are not necessarily just money, right? They could be, people are resources, right? Our commitment is a resource. Like, what can we leverage around the commitment we have as a university and as the staff? That's a resource. So there's other things. We tend to go to money. It's just because we do need that, and it's not something that I want to diminish, that it's not important. I just want to make sure people think beyond just money in terms of resource.
Are we on sustainable investments? Is that
yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I would just like to kind of point something that I've learned from other schools, actually. So a lot of other schools have a student representative on their foundation board that just works with their foundation and their portfolio investors. And then UW doesn't have that, at least that I'm not aware of, that we have one. And I would honestly really love to see a student representative that works with the UW Foundation and the Alumni Association to make sure that we're having transparency between students, staff, community members, and everyone together.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
I think along these lines, I think when Alex was showing us the table, we saw that there are opportunities there, and we're not far behind the peers, and all of us all our peers are in the same place where we are. So that means we have an opportunity, and many of the other areas we're laggards. And this is a place where we can probably leap forward and make place for ourselves, where others are still struggling. And this is a struggle because we're looking at, we want to make sure we can pay our bills, right? And what we're saying in the long term, what Michael is talking about, is that long term, there's a 4-year horizon, there's a 1-quarter horizon, there's a 10-year horizon, there's a 40-year horizon, or generational horizons. And if you think about the native thinking, 7 generations look forward to. So there's a continuum there, and here's an opportunity for us to say, here we're making a good decision, we're making a good choice for the people and for the land, even though it might look like we're killing ourselves or shooting our foot from a short-term gain that maybe 4 years or maybe even 4 months type of horizon. And I think there is a statement to be made, and I think our alumni base, the foundation base, all the stakeholders certainly will resonate with them. It doesn't have to be we're going to lose money. But the point is that, from what I have learned, at least in some of the work that I'm doing, is that if we pose it properly, people are willing to get behind what may appear to be irrational. But if you think deep enough, they are actually rational choices. And it's a matter of messaging and also educating. And it is more challenging. It's not as easy. And I think our campus should go that route, take the high road.
Yeah, that short-term thinking is a challenge, right, to overcome. And it exists all through our culture, right? It's always like you're only as good as the next quarter kind of idea.
Right.
Yeah, got it.
Deb, I apologize that I'll probably answer or point out my, it's not even a challenge, it's more of an opportunity, I think, for sustainable investments, but also with the Green Revolving Fund. You know, I'm very aware of the divestment resolutions that are going around, and you know, we'll see how that progresses moving forward. But I do believe, regardless of that one of the things that the university should strongly consider is developing an endowment within the foundation that is dedicated to this effort, because there's nothing that is more sustainable and building and will continue to support this for years to come without always having to ask for other funding sources, whether it be from the state, grants, students, you know, initiatives. If we can get investment endowments and get donors' eyes on that, and even if, you know, maybe we can find somebody that can stroke a big check or two, or a half a dozen people to do that, that endowment's going to grow by 9% every single year, and we're going to get to access 4.5% of it. So it's going to continue building, and it's a sustainable investment, you know, for decades and decades to come. I think that's something that we should really be looking at. And
it would certainly indicate that this is important to the university, right? When
absolutely.
we put something, when we put the spotlight on something like that.
That's
this is really doing a lot around this effort. Maybe we ought to knock on his door again.
Yeah, an example.
I'm talking about this.
A very good example of how you do this successfully is athletics. Now, I know the pandemic has absolutely thrown them into a tailspin, but the reason that we have such wonderful athletic facilities and we have such wonderful athletic programs on both the men's and women's side, I mean, a huge part of that is because of their endowment and their ability to continue investing. It's the exact same thing that we should do here.
Right. We've got a couple minutes left. Anything else? Go ahead.
One really quick tag to this. It's not necessarily related to transparency on our investment portfolio, but I think it goes to reporting on sort of portfolios that exist at Madison that maybe aren't investment related, but are research related. We're going through this, UW system is going through this transformation project, ATP, this administrative transformation project. And we are going to be replacing our entire financial system, our grant routing system, all this stuff. I think there's an opportunity to do some tagging of funds, and I'm thinking specifically grant funds, but maybe other funds as well, maybe gift funds and other things that have a sustainability element to them. Prior to this group starting up, Vice Chancellor Ackerman asked me for, you know, we worked together to try to put together a list of grants that had those sustainability elements to them. And it was really tough because we don't have that ability now. So we're doing keyword searches and just, you know, doing our best, but it was not as thorough as it could have been. So maybe as we move forward into this new ATP environment, we have an opportunity to report on also what we're doing that maybe isn't necessarily a financial investment, but what we're doing with federal money, for example. So I don't know if that's what I'd add.
How do we improve our systems to understand what we're doing? Yeah, we've seen that pattern across a lot of things, and it's because of our decentralization largely, right? That we don't often know what all the hands are doing. Yeah, good point. We've got about 30 seconds or so left. Anyone have any last final words that we want to?
I think I could just say, kind of talking about Kiri's point about the seven generation thinking. And when we think about things in that way, we're thinking about this. That's when you start thinking about sustainability. That's when you start thinking about what is going to be left over, what is sustained from one generation to the next, and what is continued. And talking about these investments and the point I was bringing up earlier, I'd just like to draw parallels to concerns about slavery. When
so you know, Michael, you're going to get cut off because he's going to pull us back. So just so you know.
No problem. I'll bring it up in the next one.
Thank you. Just wanted to give you a heads up there. Oh, maybe not. I thought he's. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Deb. How are you?
Well,
Hello there.
thank you all for being here. Okay, so we're going to look at the other. Oh, I think I have to reshare the focus areas because that got knocked off when we changed groups. Give me just a second here, just in case you need a reminder. There they are for you. And in our first groups, we'll just go through this one by one, I think. But in terms of institutional structures for sustainability, there were, I think some of the things that the other group talked about sort of overlap some of these issues, some of these areas. They talked about how we tend to be very lean in terms of staff. We get a lot out of our people, and maybe we need to, think about having someone who's dedicated to leading this effort, someone who sort of bangs the drum to keep us, on track, because our decentralization can be a problem for us. We really need to have strong leadership that keeps this top of mind and cues the rest of us that this is important for us to think about. A barrier we have is student turnover, right? We always have to try to re-educate new people. There's people coming and going all the time. So that can be a challenge for us if we're trying to stay on track with something. We have to bring new people into the fold every year. As some people leave and new people come in, we've got to keep re-educating people on that. That in terms of our investments, is it, think about short-term versus long-term. Maybe in the short term, it might be a lower investment perspective, result, but the long-term impact on our sustainability efforts might make that worth it. What else did we talk about? Again, top-down leadership only goes so far, but we need to have, we need the top-down leadership to get the rest of us engaged. That idea kept coming up several times. And what else? We talked about, someone suggested that there be a student representative on the foundation, that other universities have that, but that's not something that UW has. We might want to think about including that. And that we should establish an endowment in this area, that we would, like, athletics are very successful because they have a very successful endowment that allows them to do a lot of things. Developing an endowment in this area would give us a steady stream of funding to support the efforts and also indicate just how important this is to the university. And then just one other thing I want to say, going back about that investment or divestment piece, is that does the investment follow and support our values, or is the value to just make the maximum amount of dollars? So that was some of the things that came out from those groups. So anybody want to add to any of those? We can go to whichever one that you might have something to say. And again, there was some overlap between them. So, if you can't figure out exactly where your comment goes, don't worry about it. We'll just put it in there and make sure that it's noted.
I can go first. So I have a couple. Obviously, like I mentioned in the larger non-breakout room, a big takeaway from the student subcommittee was about sustainable investments and what that looks like. And obviously, like, we have the UW Divestment student organization, and like it's a very national movement. So I think students are really invested in that. I do love the idea of having a student representative on that board, just to be able to directly communicate kind of those values rather than hearing amongst the papers and blogs and stuff what students are interested in. So I'm really in favor of that idea. I'm interested in this green revolving fund. The last institution I was with, we had I'm trying to remember the exact name. It was something like the Green Fee Fund or something, but it was a student fee that was allocated specifically for sustainable infrastructure projects or engagement or research. And it was a really good thing, but culturally kind of what evolved with it was that departments were not willing to make the sustainable investment for like lighting or building upgrades or something like that. And they would just tell them go to the green fee. And then if the proposal got denied or they weren't able to fund it, it was like, well, sorry, we tried, kind of thing. So I think if we establish something like that, the way that it's communicated would be very important, of not saying this is the only place you can fund green initiatives, but this is something that can help supplement it. So very long-winded, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, framing is important. Thanks, Emma. Other thoughts? comments? Barriers and or resources. I want to say one thing about resources too, like we tend to think of money, we go there first, and it is important. We often need it to be able to do what we need to do. And it's not the only resource available to us, right? The people are resources, our commitments to things, our values, those can all be resources that we leverage in whatever work we're trying to do, not necessarily just this. So think about resources more broadly than just money.
I'm still processing here, but in our prior group, we started to talk a little bit about the institutional structures and I guess this idea or understanding of where the Office of Sustainability is positioned and how it is, I guess, prioritized amongst the administrative responsibility of, one area or another. It seems to be split between academic affairs and fiscal. I'm still processing this one, but it just sort of resonates where we are with our work with diversity, equity, and educational achievement. And sort of the evolution of years for institutions of higher education to even value and prioritize DE&I work to the point that it's a shared responsibility across the institution. And now, most administrators, schools, colleges, departments, and divisions have, strategies, assessment tools, and expectations to engage diversity in a certain way. And that seems to have evolved from a top-down approach. But I think it's the grassroots efforts that really help to realize the necessity of diversity, for example, being a priority. And so I'm having a consistent sort of processing of the sort of relationship or similar journey we may be taking, I guess, to embrace or engage sustainability.
Yeah, the structure matters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how you structure it determines what you get.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's that famous quote, it's something about organizations are perfectly structured to achieve the results they are structured to achieve, right? So if we want sustainability, how do we structure the organization to achieve that?
And yeah, so I think it's, yeah, okay. I'm processing that, but that's through prioritization. Where there's priority, then the allocation of resources, systems, resources and systems and policies, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
be
coordinated across all of those, right?
Yeah, I'm processing though. I apologize. I don't know that I'm saying anything worthwhile at the moment.
Oh, that's perfect.
That's where I'm processing.
There's a lot to think about here, so that's perfect. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Hey Deb, this is Nola. Can you clarify your request of us? Well, what is our goal for this,
sure.
This session?
Just, we can just, what are the barriers? What are the resources that we have in these areas that we can leverage? What are the challenges that we have to be aware of in these areas that we need to, think about as we're trying to prioritize these and or implement some things in these areas?
I don't know if you're speaking. You're not on my screen, so I can't tell if you're about to speak.
Oh, no, I'm not. No.
Okay. So back in this institutional structures area, I think it's great and important to see some of the channels, structural channels like student or shared governance, Obviously, student, faculty, and staff roles and function. I forgot what my ad was. There was another area that I thought might be helpful, but now it's evaporated. It just went away from my brain. So hold on, let me think about it again.
Don't think about it and it'll come back to you.
Oh my gosh, it went away just like that.
Don't think about it and it'll come back to you, Cheryl.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Hey, Deb, what was that quote again? You shared a quote that really struck with me about organizations are structured. What was can you share that again?
They're designed to create exactly what they get. So
Yeah.
if you have whatever it is you have an organization that's structured to give you that.
Thank you.
And if you want something different, you have to do something different. You have to create a different structure. Right?
Thank you.
I always like to say, if you're making pizza and you say you want chocolate chip cookies, you got to do something different. You're not going to get doing the same thing as when you make pizza. Right?
Chocolate chip pizza, though. Chocolate chip
Maybe.
pizza. Yeah, but no, thank you.
So we have to think about how the structures change as well.
Yeah.
So I think what was coming to mind, now I see it on the next row. We're really just this evidence of a need for strategic plans, which sort of in some way integrates itself into an expectation system, accountability, and process mapping and thinking. So, but I get it's below. So everybody's already done the great thinking. It's really there.
Well, it doesn't hurt to know that other people, think that's important as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be helpful if we shared the notes from that instead of the focus areas from the other conversation?
For me, in seeing what's here, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful examples that are all inspiring and also confirming, right? But I feel like what's missing when you ask what are the challenges, right? What are the barriers? Those are things that, I tend to be very direct when I communicate, and I'm like, what are we talking about? And in our prior session, we hear that, okay, the positionality of the current Office of Sustainability is a challenge. Well, I didn't know that where it was located specifically because my perception has been at a different level. And then with regards to communication, I'm thinking, well, what are the challenges? Like, if you don't know that behind the curtains, it's hard to appreciate what's needed, right? So that it isn't like this is what is now, and this is why it's a challenge. It's like this is an issue. So I don't know what has been a challenge. So with regards to the structure, right, and in terms of the integration of it, I feel, going back to even with diversity, it's not a matter of we don't know how. It's not even a matter of resources, because we went to Mars. You can do what you value. You can do what you value. You can say you value it, but it's in the doing. And for me, that goes into intention and will that is not something you're going to see on paper, right? So it's those invisible things that really are impacting this from becoming a reality. If it is a value, the values will be evident in the structuring of a position in ways made to facilitate communication, right? So it's really the commitment from above, with specific to build the environment that we say we want, right? If it is inherent in the strategic framework, then it needs to be articulated. Otherwise, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's assumed you want fresh air. Like, well, you're breathing. It's not fresh air, right? If we say that, then what would we do differently to have fresh air, right?
Right.
So I feel like it needs to be there, documented in evidence for anyone to see, not to seek, investigate, and uncover and unearth.
Sorry, Nola, you got cut off there.
Yeah, well, I'm done. It's probably a good thing. So
it's one of the downsides of Zoom, right? We don't always get to control what's happening.
My 15-year-old would love if there was a way to zoom me out or mute me. Thank you.
Well,
thank you for your efforts. Yeah.
sorry if we had to cut any folks off. Sorry about that, Nola. But Deb, why don't you lead us through kind of our round robin of big takeaways?
Okay, so just as we've done in other sessions, and for those of you that haven't been here before, we like to wrap up with sort of this big question of, what is it that stuck out for you from this conversation? Just kind of bring it all back and sort of summarize what we've talked about. So I don't call on people to be mean to go first. I just kind of look at my screen and start where it makes sense to start. And Jiri, you're first up. So it's going to be Jiri, Cheryl, and then Nathan. Oh, not Nathan. Who's JWK? I don't know what that name means. Whoever.
That's Jason. Yeah.
Jason. Okay. So Jiri, Cheryl, and Jason.
Yeah, I think we talked about a lot of different things, but I think what stuck to me in today's conversation again and again came back was what Matt started out with, this sort of this informal process that comes in from our voices, from the leadership, and it sort of permeates how we think about things. And that informal process is extremely important, is what my big takeaway from the last 45 minutes.
Thank you. Cheryl, Jason, and then John.
Oh boy, I might ramble here, forgive me. A lot of my takeaways, I think I spent the last, 30 minutes or so really moving back and forth with the way I see engaging diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that has transpired in higher education or in the world over decades, and how sort of consuming it is to get to a point where institutions or organizations embrace diversity as a value or a priority, and then are communicating, articulating a strategy, resources, a priority, or even personnel to this notion of diversity, and why it, it's like the business case means that this is meaningful to our institution. We can't be who we are unless we embrace or engage this notion around diversity and inclusion. And I think sustainability, we're still in that process or that pathway. So I hate to say I'm still doing the same original work in the area of DE&I when I started 31 years ago. Haven't necessarily changed the process yet, because we're still working through that buy-in process for people to embrace and engage diversity. And I think sustainability is there. So I found myself today looking at the patterns and the paths of how to, I don't know, how to promote or elevate the voices to demand sustainability be a core value of our institutional mission, and therefore integrated into all the things that we do and say and believe. And we have to introduce that it's top down and it's down up in order to be effective. And the principles we were looking at today, I thought were very thoroughly thought of in terms of structures, priorities, social sustainability really being interwoven throughout all
Great.
Priorities. And yeah, I've told you I would ramble, so I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Cheryl. Uh-oh, now my screen just got all messed up. Jason, John, and Natalie.
Yeah, this is obviously my first opportunity to sit in with the group, so I really took most of the day just to try to learn and listen. I think really what I learned today is just how important sustainability is to the campus and the opportunities that we have ahead of us. So that's kind of what I took away from the conversation.
Thanks. John, Natalie, and Emma.
Yeah, building off of what Cheryl just said, what I took away, because it came up in both conversations, is the need for, from Matt's comments when you took his, we're this decentralized campus, and the top-down decisions don't always go so far if you don't have buy-in from everybody at the top, and the need for key leadership in that core value. If we're going to invest in this as a core value of the university, as Matt had said, and that this is one of the 4 core values that we talk about, then we need to treat it as such from a leadership standpoint and make sure that there's a clear and consistent expectation across all areas of the institution in order to deliver on these areas that we continue to talk about in sustainability. So the leadership was my key takeaway today for sure.
Thanks, John. Natalie, Emma, and Jacob.
All right. My biggest key takeaway today was probably it's like redesigning the narrative to sustainability so that when we think about sustainability, it's not just energy efficiency, cost saving, but it's including social sustainability and creating equity and inclusive environments for all.
Thanks, Natalie. Emma, Jacob, and Nick.
Very similar thought to Natalie. In our first breakout room, Nathan asked about social sustainability, whether it should be incorporated to all of the priorities or be its own. And my response was yes. The more places that we can include it, the better. I think it's important to have it as its own priority, so we can communicate to upper leadership who are making decisions that this is a priority, but I do not want to be in the situation where it's 5th on the list and we can only take 4. So I think it needs to be like included into just about everything that we're doing.
Yeah. Jacob, Nick, and Todd. Jacob, you're muted yet. Sorry.
That was the third Jacob I heard. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure which one I am. So I took away that I was able to break down what social sustainability was in my own personal understanding. So that's what I'm walking away with. I appreciate all that got me there. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick and Todd.
So my takeaway, and this is my first meeting, my takeaway really is, this is a big initiative, and this initiative requires resources. And if we're going to be serious about this, we have to be serious about putting resources towards it, especially, just talking about what some of our students were talking about, what Michael was talking about. Like this is very important. This is human lives. This is people's well-being, and it's very important to ensure that we put adequate resources behind this, and that this really cuts across a lot of areas. I know I get tunnel vision a lot with regard to my specific area of work, which is research grants, but this touches on research grants and reporting and things of that nature as well. So I think those are all key points that I took away.
Thanks, Nick. And Todd, want to bring it home?
Yeah, bringing it home. Thanks, Deb. Thank you again for having us as part of this discussion today. My takeaways were the great brainstorming, I think, that was done about the foundation and the idea of perhaps having a student on the board. I think that's a really good takeaway that I'd like to bring back to our leadership. I think another idea was to maybe encourage an endowment for sustainability within the foundation. That's a great idea. I had not thought about that before. And so I appreciate the brainstorming. I think great ideas there.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I forgot about you, Michael. I didn't see you, so I forgot. I'm sorry. I'm glad you said something. Finish up for us.
No problem. I think my points just echo a lot of what everyone else has been saying. I think the biggest thing I took away is valuing, just valuing sustainability and valuing maintaining what we have, and that in terms of resources as humanity, all the way to the energy and all that we can use. And I think what I was mainly thinking about during all of this is that there's always been these reasons of to not do divestment, that there's not funding there, that there's not this kind of support financially. And I kind of want to move away from that narrative, just because when I think back on historical events, funding was used as arguments for many different things, such as why slavery should not be abolished. So this focus on funding over human lives and human mental health and human happiness and prosperity, being one of those 3 bottom lines, I think is really important, and one of the main things that I was thinking about throughout all these discussions.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Alex, to wrap us up.
All right. Really quickly, I just threw a link to the typical survey we send out. I threw it right in the chat because again, we're asking for a quick turnaround on this. If it's possible to complete that by end of day Tuesday. If you want to just do it right now, go right ahead. Wouldn't stop you. But other than that, quick next steps. We need that done so fast because we have our next round of listening sessions and they start Thursday of next week. Again, you are by no means required to attend these listening sessions, although you can if you would like, but we'll be running them and we'll bring back the results of those sessions where we're going to ask attendees to see a little bit of the work that we've done thus far, the focus areas we've done, the initial thoughts of what could be priorities, and get their initial feedback on that. So that'll be, the results of that will be at our next meeting in April. And last thing, our next 2 meetings, we're going to break away from this structure that we've had. So we're moving away from opportunity evaluation to trying to synthesize what we've talked about thus far to get towards some of our final priorities. So if you've been bored by our meeting cadence thus far, don't worry, we're going to change it up. It's going to be a little different next time. So look for some slightly different pre-read materials and a different structure for our next meeting. That is it. Right on time at 12:30. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the time.